September 1939. A mother in Warsaw wraps a loaf of bread in yesterday's newspaper. The headline announces something about Poland, about borders, about words like invasion that don't yet mean what they will come to mean. She sets the bread on the table. Her children are still sleeping. In 3 years, she will be dead. Her children will be dead too. The table will be firewood in someone else's home. But this morning, in this kitchen, steam still rises from a pot of chicory coffee, and she still believes that being careful, being quiet, being useful might be enough. This is not the story you think you know. You've seen the films. You know the camps, the trains, the liberation photographs that history has turned into monuments. But between 1933 and 1945, 12 years unfolded one morning at a time. 12 years of breakfast tables and birthday candles, of children walking to schools that would close, of neighbors who stopped saying hello, of laws that arrived like paper cuts, small, precise, and then suddenly everywhere. The question wasn't whether horror was coming. The question, for millions of Jewish families across Europe, was how to live while it did. What was it actually like to be a Jew during World War II? Not in the statistics, not in the archives, but in the small apartments and crowded tenements, in the moments between the headlines. When did normal life stop feeling normal? At what point did a yellow star sewn onto a coat become just another part of getting dressed in the morning? When did the impossible become routine? This is the story of those 12 years. It's the story of how people tried to hold on to ordinary life, even as ordinary life was being systematically dismantled around them. How they celebrated holidays in hiding. How they taught children in secret. How they buried records in milk cans so someone someday might understand. History remembers the end. But before the end came the beginning, when it still seemed possible that things might not get worse, that this too would pass, that being a good neighbor, a good citizen, a good German or Pole or Hungarian Jew might count for something. It didn't. It was 1933, and in Berlin, in the Jewish quarter, life carried a peculiar weight. Not the weight of chains yet, but the weight of atmosphere before a storm. In the bakeries along Grenadierstrasse, the smell of challah still filled Friday afternoons. At the Scheunenviertel market, vendors called out prices for potatoes, for herring, for bolts of cloth. Children still attended the local schools. Families still gathered for Shabbat dinner. But something had shifted in the air, in the spaces between words, in the way neighbors looked at each other or didn't. In January, a new government took power. The newspapers celebrated. The radio broadcasts spoke of renewal, of national awakening, of Germany rising from humiliation. In Jewish homes, people listened and said little. They had heard this kind of talk before. Blame, scapegoating, the old accusations dressed in new uniforms. It would pass. It always passed. Germany was a civilized country, a country of law, of Kant and Beethoven and university professors. Surely that counted for something. In April, the first law arrived. It was bureaucratic, almost boring in its language. The law for the restoration of the professional civil service. It meant that Jewish teachers, Jewish judges, Jewish civil servants were no longer permitted to work for the state. A grandfather who had taught mathematics for 30 years received a letter thanking him for his service. A judge who had presided over cases since before the war found himself escorted from the courthouse. Just like that. A form, a stamp, a polite dismissal. People adjusted. What else could they do? Jewish lawyers opened private practices. Jewish doctors treated Jewish patients. A community that had been woven into German life began to weave itself into something smaller, tighter, more insular. Not by choice, but by necessity. In the streets, other changes took their shape. Stormtroopers stood outside Jewish-owned shops, not violently at first, just there, present, holding signs that read, "Germans, defend yourselves." "Don't buy from Jews." Some Germans walked past them, embarrassed, defiant. Others stopped shopping at stores they'd frequented for years. A seamstress who had made dresses for 3 generations of a family found her appointments cancelled. No explanation, just silence. In 1935, the Nuremberg Laws formalized what had been creeping forward through the culture. 2 laws, announced in September at the annual Nazi Party rally: the Reich Citizenship Law and the Law for the Protection of German Blood and German Honor. Dry titles for devastating reality. Jews were no longer citizens. They were subjects, residents, people without rights. Marriage between Jews and non-Jews was forbidden. Sexual relations between Jews and non-Jews became a crime called race defilement. Employing a German woman under 45 in a Jewish household was illegal. The machinery of exclusion was building itself piece by piece, law by law, form by form. And the remarkable thing, the thing that would seem impossible later, was how ordinary it felt in the moment. Not ordinary like normal, but ordinary like inevitable, like weather. You didn't argue with a storm. You closed the windows and waited for it to pass. In Jewish kitchens, mothers still made soup. Fathers still went to work, those who still had work. Children still did their homework. Life didn't stop because the law changed. Life adjusted, compressed, found new shapes. People told themselves it couldn't get worse than this. They told themselves to be patient, to keep their heads down, to wait. They told themselves that Germany, rational Germany, civilized Germany, would remember itself. But in the synagogues, in the quiet conversations after services, some people were already making different calculations. They were learning languages, applying for visas, selling what they could sell, packing what they could carry. A door that had been half open for generations was closing, and they could feel the draft. The question wasn't whether to leave anymore. The question was where to go, and whether there was still time. By 1936, the rules had become routine. A Jewish child in Munich knew not to sit on park benches marked for Aryans only. A Jewish family in Frankfurt knew not to enter certain shops, certain restaurants, certain swimming pools. The signs were everywhere, multiplying like weeds. Jews unwelcome. Jews enter at their own risk. No Jews or dogs. The humiliation was the point. Not violence, not yet, but degradation. 1,000 small exclusions, each one designed to remind Jewish Germans that they didn't belong, had never belonged, would never belong. The propaganda seeped into everything. Children's textbooks taught that Jews were parasites, that they spread disease, that they corrupted pure German blood. On the radio, on film, in newspapers, the message repeated until it became background noise, until it shaped the way people thought without them even noticing. In Jewish homes, parents faced impossible questions. How do you explain to a 7-year-old why her best friend's mother won't let them play together anymore? How do you tell a boy that his teacher, who praised his mathematics last year, now calls him lazy and degenerate? How do you maintain dignity when the world is systematically trying to strip it from you? Some families retreated into their own communities, into the rhythms of religious life, into the comfort of shared experience. Synagogues became not just places of worship, but centers of mutual aid, of community, of resistance through persistence. Secret schools formed where Jewish children could learn without propaganda. Youth groups organized hikes and camps where, for a few hours, kids could forget the signs and the laws and just be kids. Others tried to leave, but leaving required money, connections, a country willing to take you. The United States had strict quotas. Britain accepted some. Palestine was an option, but the British mandate limited immigration there too. South America, Shanghai, anywhere that would grant a visa. Families sold businesses for a fraction of their worth. They navigated bureaucracies designed to obstruct them. They waited in lines at consulates, clutching papers, hoping. And then came November 1938. It started with a shooting in Paris. A 17-year-old Polish Jewish boy, whose parents had been deported from Germany to the Polish border and left in limbo, walked into the German embassy and shot a German diplomat. The diplomat died 2 days later. The Nazi regime had the excuse it wanted. November 9th, 1938. Kristallnacht, the night of broken glass. Though it wasn't just one night and it wasn't spontaneous, no matter what the propaganda claimed. It was organized, planned, executed with precision. Stormtroopers and Nazi Party members, dressed as civilians, descended on Jewish neighborhoods across Germany, Austria, and the Sudetenland. They smashed windows of Jewish shops. They burned synagogues, over 1,000 of them, while firefighters stood by and made sure only Jewish buildings burned. They dragged Jewish men from their homes and beat them in the streets. In Vienna, in Berlin, in small towns across the Reich, Jewish families huddled in their apartments and listened to the sound of glass shattering, of boots on pavement, of shouting and breaking and burning. Some hid. Some ran. Some stood in their doorways and watched their lives be destroyed while their neighbors watched too, from behind curtains, saying nothing. 30,000 Jewish men were arrested that night and the days after, not for crimes, just for being Jewish. They were sent to concentration camps, Dachau, Buchenwald, Sachsenhausen, places that had existed since 1933 but had mostly held political prisoners before. Now they filled with Jewish prisoners, subjected to forced labor, beatings, humiliation designed to break them, to make them sign papers agreeing to leave Germany immediately. And here was the cruel logic. Germany wanted Jews gone, but it also wanted their property, their wealth, their belongings. So the state seized it all. Jewish business owners were forced to sell to Aryan Germans at prices the state dictated. Jews were collectively fined 1 billion Reichsmarks for the damage of Kristallnacht, forced to pay for their own persecution. Insurance payouts for destroyed property went to the state, not to the victims. The narrowing world had become a trap. Jews couldn't stay, but they couldn't leave. They couldn't work, but they needed money to emigrate. They couldn't own businesses, but they were required to sell them. Every exit was closing, every option eliminated, and the machinery kept grinding forward, methodical, bureaucratic, relentless. In the months after Kristallnacht, those who could get out, got out. Children were sent on Kindertransports to Britain, their parents staying behind, hoping to follow, knowing they might never see their children again. Families scattered across continents, but for every person who escaped, thousands remained trapped by circumstance, by poverty, by the simple fact that the world had closed its doors. The question was no longer whether things would get worse. The question was how much worse and how fast. September 1st, 1939. German tanks crossed into Poland. Within weeks, the Wehrmacht controlled Warsaw, Krakow, Łódź, and with the army came new orders, new administrators, new plans for what to do with Poland's 3 million Jews, the largest Jewish population in Europe. At first, it was chaos, random violence, mass shootings, villages burned. But the Nazi regime didn't want chaos. It wanted control. It wanted the systematic organization of persecution, the kind that could be managed, documented, made efficient. So in October, the orders went out. All Jews in German-occupied Poland would be concentrated into specific areas within cities. Ghettos. The word was old, medieval. It conjured images of the Venetian ghetto, of centuries-old Jewish quarters. But these would be different. These would be prisons, sealed and guarded, where hundreds of thousands of people would be crammed into spaces meant for thousands. In Łódź, the ghetto was established in February 1940 in the oldest, poorest part of the city. Over 160,000 Jews were forced into 1.5 square miles. Entire families squeezed into single rooms, buildings without plumbing, without heating. The ghetto was sealed in May. Wooden fences topped with barbed wire surrounded it. German guards at every exit. No one in, no one out, except for labor details. In Warsaw, the process took longer, but the result was more devastating. By October 1940, over 400,000 Jews were forced into an area of 1.3 square miles. A wall went up 3 meters high, topped with broken glass and barbed wire. Guards at the gates, separate from the rest of the city, invisible to most Poles who could go on with their lives pretending the ghetto didn't exist. Inside the walls, life reorganized itself around survival. The official food ration was 184 calories per day. Starvation levels. To live meant to smuggle, to bribe, to trade, to work. Children squeezed through holes in the walls or under fences, risking their lives to bring back a loaf of bread, a potato, anything. Women sewed clothes. Men worked in workshops producing goods for the German war effort. Jewish councils, appointed by the Nazis, tried to manage the impossible, distributing insufficient food, maintaining order, negotiating with authorities who viewed them as temporary administrators of a population marked for elimination. The cruelty was in the details. Families who had lived in comfortable apartments were forced into rooms with no windows. Lawyers, doctors, teachers found themselves begging for scraps. Typhus spread through the overcrowded quarters. Bodies appeared on the streets each morning, people who had frozen or starved during the night. Collection carts came by at dawn to gather them, and yet inside the walls, life persisted. Not because anyone was naive about their situation, but because being human meant more than just surviving. It meant celebrating a child's birthday with a cake made from sawdust and hoarded sugar. It meant organizing concerts, theatrical performances in basement rooms. It meant schools, secret schools, where children learned history and mathematics and Hebrew, preparing for futures that would never come. In the Warsaw Ghetto, a man named Emanuel Ringelblum began a project. He called it Oneg Shabbat, Joy of the Sabbath. It was an archive, a secret collection of documents, diaries, photographs, scraps of daily life. Ringelblum understood something the Nazis didn't want anyone to understand, that this was being done deliberately, systematically, and that if no one documented it, the perpetrators would erase the evidence and deny it ever happened. So he and dozens of collaborators collected everything: ration cards, children's drawings, testimonies, reports on disease, on starvation, on the mechanisms of the ghetto. They buried the documents in milk cans and metal boxes, hidden beneath buildings, waiting for someone someday to find them and bear witness. Meanwhile, in the rest of occupied Europe, the pattern repeated. In cities across Poland, Holland, France, Hungary, ghettos formed or Jewish populations were concentrated. In some places, walls; in others, designated zones. Always the same logic: separate, isolate, control. The world outside went on. In neutral countries, newspapers printed occasional stories. The United States was still officially neutral. Britain was at war with Germany, but focused on its own survival. The information was there, the evidence of what was happening, but it competed with other news, other priorities, and it was easy to file away, to think about later, to assume someone else would do something. Inside the ghettos, people knew. They knew these walls weren't temporary. They knew the rations weren't meant to sustain them. They knew the guards weren't there for their protection. The question that haunted the crowded rooms was simple and impossible. How long could this last? They didn't know yet that the walls were just the beginning, that what came next would make the ghettos seem almost merciful by comparison. June 1941. Germany invaded the Soviet Union. Operation Barbarossa. 3 million German soldiers pushed east and behind them came units with a different mission. They were called Einsatzgruppen, mobile killing squads, and their orders were explicit. Eliminate Jews, communist officials, anyone deemed an enemy of the Reich. They moved through villages in Ukraine, Belarus, the Baltic states. They rounded up Jewish populations, marched them to ravines, to forests, to the edges of towns. They forced them to dig pits. Then they shot them. Men, women, children, entire communities erased in single afternoons. At Babi Yar, outside Kyiv, over 33,000 Jews were murdered in 2 days. The ravine ran with blood. The earth moved for days afterward as bodies settled. This was the Holocaust before the camps, before the industrial machinery, when murder was personal, direct, a bullet to the back of the head. The Einsatzgruppen killed over 1 million people this way, but it was inefficient, the Nazi leadership concluded. It took too long. It required too many men. It was too visible, too psychologically taxing on the shooters. They needed a better method. They found it in gas. The first experiments happened in late 1941. Carbon monoxide pumped into sealed vans. Jewish prisoners forced inside. The engine started, the exhaust redirected. It worked. It was quiet. It didn't require shooters to look their victims in the eyes. It was, in the language of the regime, more humane, not for the victims, but for the perpetrators. In January 1942, Nazi leadership met at a villa in Wannsee, outside Berlin. The meeting lasted 90 minutes. They discussed logistics, coordination between agencies, the technical details of what they called the final solution to the Jewish question. 11 million Jews across Europe were to be systematically murdered. The decision had already been made. This meeting was about implementation. The death camps were already being built, not concentration camps like Dachau, which had been designed for imprisonment and forced labor. These were different. These were factories of death, their only purpose to kill as many people as possible, as quickly as possible. Belzec opened in March 1942. Then Sobibor, then Treblinka. These were in occupied Poland, in remote areas connected by rail. They weren't large, complex camps. They were killing centers, pure and simple. Gas chambers disguised as showers, a small staff of German SS and Ukrainian guards. A few dozen Jewish prisoners kept alive temporarily to sort belongings, to burn bodies, to keep the machinery running. The process was refined to brutal efficiency. Trains arrived, sometimes daily, packed with Jews from ghettos across Poland. The doors opened. Guards shouted orders. People were separated, those fit for labor in one direction, everyone else toward the showers. They were told they were being disinfected. They were given soap, told to remember where they hung their clothes. Then they were locked inside and the Zyklon B pellets were dropped in. It took 15 minutes. Longer if the chambers were too crowded for the gas to circulate. The bodies were removed, searched for gold teeth, wedding rings, anything valuable. They were burned in open pits at first, later in specially constructed crematoria. The belongings, suitcases full of clothes, family photographs, children's toys, were sorted, catalogued, shipped to Germany for reuse. At Auschwitz-Birkenau, the largest of the camps, the system was even more elaborate. This was both a labor camp and a death camp. Trains arrived at a platform built specially for this purpose. A selection process. Those who looked strong enough to work were sent to the labor camp. Everyone else, the elderly, children, pregnant women, anyone who looked weak, went straight to the gas chambers. In the summer of 1944, at the height of the Hungarian deportations, the crematoria at Auschwitz-Birkenau burned day and night and still couldn't keep up. Bodies were burned in open pits. Meanwhile, back in the ghettos, the deportations began. In Warsaw, in July 1942, the orders came. 6,000 Jews per day would be resettled to the east. The ghetto police, under German supervision, went building by building. Families were given minutes to pack a small bag. They were marched to the Umschlagplatz, the gathering point, and loaded onto cattle cars. 80, 100 people per car. No water, no sanitation. Journeys that took hours or days. Many died before they even arrived at Treblinka. People in the ghettos knew. Not all the details, not at first, but they knew the resettlement was a lie. Reports filtered back from those who escaped, from Polish railway workers, from resistance members. The Nazis were murdering everyone. The trains didn't go to labor camps. They went to death. And yet, what could they do? Some hid. Some tried to get Aryan papers, to pass as non-Jewish, to escape into the Polish side of cities. Some joined resistance groups forming in the ghettos, smuggling weapons, preparing for an impossible fight. Most had no choice. They were trapped. They had children they couldn't abandon, elderly parents who couldn't run. They did what humans do when there are no good options. They hoped. They hoped the reports were exaggerated. They hoped they might be among the ones selected for labor. They hoped someone, somewhere, would intervene. No one did. The trains kept running. The camps kept operating. The machinery ground forward, indifferent, relentless, turning millions of lives into ash and silence. By 1943, the Jewish populations of Poland, the Soviet Union, and much of Western Europe had been decimated. Entire communities erased. But in the remnants, in the ghettos and forests and hiding places, resistance took shape. Not the organized, uniformed resistance of armies, but something more desperate, more defiant. In the Warsaw Ghetto, which had been reduced from 400,000 to fewer than 60,000 through deportations, a decision crystallized. If death was certain, better to die fighting. The Jewish Combat Organization, a coalition of young people from various political movements, had been smuggling weapons into the ghetto. A few pistols, some grenades, homemade explosives. Nothing that could win a war, but enough to make a stand. On April 19, 1943, the Nazis entered the ghetto to liquidate it entirely, to deport the remaining Jews to Treblinka. They expected no resistance. They were wrong. Fighters attacked from buildings, from bunkers, from rooftops. The Germans retreated, shocked. For the first time, Jewish resistance had forced German forces to withdraw. It lasted 4 weeks, the Warsaw Ghetto uprising. The Nazis brought in artillery, tanks, flamethrowers. They burned the ghetto building by building, block by block. Fighters held out in bunkers, emerging at night to strike and then disappearing into the ruins. But the outcome was never in doubt. By May 16th, the ghetto was rubble. Most of the fighters were dead. The few survivors escaped through sewers or were captured and sent to camps. The uprising didn't save lives. It didn't change the outcome. But it mattered. It mattered because it proved that Jews weren't passive victims, that they could fight, that they did fight, when given even the smallest chance. And word of it spread, inspiring resistance in other ghettos, in other camps. In Sobibor, in October 1943, Jewish prisoners orchestrated an uprising. They killed several SS guards, cut the phone lines, and made a run for the fences. About 300 escaped into the surrounding forests. Half were caught and killed. The rest survived by joining partisan groups or hiding until liberation. Sobibor was closed after the uprising. The Nazis tore it down, planted trees, tried to erase the evidence. In Treblinka, in August 1943, another uprising. Prisoners set buildings on fire, killed guards, breached the fences. Most were shot while escaping or hunted down afterward, but a few dozen survived to testify. In the forests of Eastern Europe, Jewish partisans formed guerrilla groups. They sabotaged rail lines, attacked German patrols, helped other Jews hide. They lived in makeshift camps, constantly moving, always hunted. The Bielski brothers in Belarus sheltered over 1,000 Jews in the forest, the largest rescue operation by Jews during the war. They proved that survival itself could be resistance. But for every story of resistance, there were thousands of stories of people with no chance to fight, no weapons, no options. The deportations continued. Hungary, which had been an Axis ally and had largely protected its Jewish population until 1944, was occupied by Germany in March of that year. Within weeks, the deportations began. Over 400,000 Hungarian Jews were sent to Auschwitz between May and July 1944. The gas chambers and crematoria operated at capacity. When they couldn't keep up, bodies were burned in open pits. In hiding places across Europe, Jewish families lived in attics, in cellars, in hidden rooms behind walls. Anne Frank and her family in Amsterdam, the Bileckis sheltering the Kowalski family in Przemysl. Thousands of individual stories of people who depended on the courage and decency of non-Jewish neighbors. Some of those neighbors risked everything to help. Others turned them in for money or out of fear or ideology. The hidden life was unbearable in its own way. Silence was mandatory. Children couldn't cry, couldn't play, couldn't go outside. Months, years spent in a single room, whispering, waiting. Dependent on others for food, for information, for safety. Knowing that a single noise, a single mistake could mean death for everyone. Some survived this way until liberation. Many didn't. A neighbor informed. A hiding place was discovered. The ending was always the same: deportation, camp, death. By late 1944, the Nazi regime knew it was losing the war. The Soviets were advancing from the east. The Allies had landed in France. Germany was being bombed, its cities burning. But the killing of Jews continued. Even as resources were desperately needed for the war effort, trains were diverted to carry Jews to camps. Guards were kept at death camps instead of sent to the front. The machinery of genocide operated until the very end, prioritized even over military necessity. January 1945. The Red Army was approaching Auschwitz. The SS began evacuating the camp, trying to hide the evidence to move prisoners deeper into Germany before the Soviets arrived. Over 60,000 prisoners were forced on death marches, walking through snow in striped uniforms and wooden clogs, without adequate food or water. Those who couldn't keep up were shot. Thousands died on the roads. On January 27th, Soviet soldiers entered Auschwitz. They found about 7,000 prisoners left behind, too sick or weak to march. They found warehouses filled with belongings. Over 800,000 women's dresses, mountains of shoes, human hair shaved from corpses and bundled for shipping. They found the gas chambers, the crematoria, the evidence of industrial murder. They found children, living skeletons who stared at them with hollow eyes. Across Germany and Poland, as Allied forces advanced, they liberated camp after camp. Bergen-Belsen in April, where British soldiers found tens of thousands of unburied corpses and survivors so emaciated they barely looked human. Dachau, Buchenwald, Mauthausen. Each liberation revealed the same horror, the same piles of bodies, the same survivors, barely alive, many dying even after liberation because their bodies couldn't process food anymore. The world saw the photographs, the films. Generals made sure the evidence was documented because they knew how unbelievable it would seem. Eisenhower ordered German civilians from nearby towns to tour the camps to see what had been done in their name. Some wept, some claimed they didn't know. Some turned away, unable or unwilling to look. For the survivors, liberation didn't mean freedom, not really. It meant the dying stopped, but it didn't mean life returned to normal. There was no normal to return to. Families were gone. Communities were erased. Survivors wandered through displaced persons camps, searching for relatives, finding mostly absence. They posted notices. Does anyone know what happened to? Have you seen? I am looking for. Some searched for months, for years. They found siblings, cousins sometimes. More often they found records, documents confirming what they already knew. Mother, Auschwitz, 1943. Father, shot, 1942. Children, Treblinka. An entire family tree reduced to dates and locations of death. The scope of it was impossible to grasp. 6 million Jews murdered. 2/3 of European Jewry, 9 out of 10 Polish Jews, 3 million Soviet Jews, entire cultures, languages, traditions erased. Yiddish-speaking communities in Eastern Europe that had existed for centuries, gone. The vibrant Jewish life of cities like Warsaw, Vilnius, Prague, Łódź, destroyed. And it had been systematic. Not chaos, not spontaneous violence, but bureaucracy, forms and lists and train schedules. Scientists calculated the most efficient methods of killing. Engineers designed gas chambers. Accountants tracked the value of stolen property. Ordinary people, clerks, railway workers, police officers, participated in murder without ever thinking of themselves as murderers. They were just following orders, doing their jobs, filling out the paperwork. This was what made it unique, what separated it from other atrocities. The industrialized efficiency, the bureaucratic banality, the transformation of murder into a system, a process, something that could be managed, optimized, scaled. In the years after, survivors tried to rebuild. Some went to Israel, helping to build a new state. Others went to America, to Britain, to wherever would take them. They married, had children, tried to create new families to replace the ones they'd lost. But the loss never left. It shaped everything. How they parented, how they viewed the world, the nightmares that came in the dark. Many couldn't talk about it, not for years, sometimes decades. The memories were too painful, too impossible to explain to people who hadn't lived through it. How do you explain what it was like in the ghetto, in the camp, in the hiding place? How do you make someone understand the fear, the hunger, the constant awareness that your life meant nothing to the people who controlled it? So they stayed silent, often. They focused on survival in a different way, on building new lives, on not looking back. Until later, when survivors began to speak, to testify, to write memoirs, to give interviews, because they realized that if they didn't, if they let the silence persist, the world might forget, or worse, might claim it never happened. The clocks in the ghetto stopped ticking long ago. The kitchens grew cold. The children who should have grown old never did. But the evidence remains, in the archives, in the testimonies, in the milk cans buried beneath Warsaw that were found in 1946 and 1950, preserving the truth that Emanuel Ringelblum and his collaborators risked everything to document. This was real life for Jews during World War II. Not the sanitized version, not the abstract statistics, but the actual lived experience of 12 years that began with exclusion and ended with ash. It was mothers trying to feed children on 184 calories a day. It was fathers smuggling food through ghetto walls at risk of execution. It was resistance fighters with 3 bullets deciding that dignity mattered more than survival. It was families torn apart at train platforms, never seeing each other again. It was people trying to remain human in a system designed to erase their humanity. And remarkably, impossibly, they often succeeded. They married in ghettos. They educated children in hiding. They preserved culture and memory, even as they were being murdered. They left behind diaries and drawings and testimonies so that we, now, might understand. The Holocaust didn't happen because of monsters. It happened because of ordinary people who chose obedience over conscience, silence over action, conformity over resistance. It happened because governments made it policy, because industries profited from it, because neighbors looked away, because the world closed its doors to refugees and decided it wasn't their problem. And it happened to people. Not to numbers, not to abstract victims, but to individuals with names and faces and dreams. Teachers and shopkeepers and children and grandparents. People who loved and argued and laughed and cried and wanted what everyone wants: to live, to be safe, to matter. We remember them not because the story is easy, but because it's true. We study the details not to traumatize ourselves, but to understand what humans are capable of, both the worst and the best. We preserve the testimony because those who survived wanted us to know, needed us to know, demanded that we know. If this story moved you, challenged you, or helped you see the Second World War differently, it would be an honor to have you join our growing community. Subscribing isn't just a click. It's a way to support more powerful stories, more forgotten voices, and more truth from the past. So if you believe these stories matter, hit that subscribe button, and let's keep building this journey together. And don't forget to leave a comment. We read everyone and love hearing your thoughts. Until next time, keep exploring history with Epic War. Keep asking questions, keep seeking the truth,